minutes to advance. Here's the slide of some of our team that's not here. And let's begin with the question of what are racial covenants? Now, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this. You may have read the article in the Journal Sentinel, or you may have encountered these in your own property records. I've certainly heard from some of you about this. But when we're talking about covenants, we're talking about clauses that are inserted into property deeds. And when we think about covenants, they can apply to a range of details with regard to housing, including details like the height of buildings, the amount of setback from the sidewalk, the height of fences, the appearance and style of housing. But when we talk about racially restrictive covenants, we are talking about clauses inserted into property deeds that prevented non-white people from owning or occupying property. And so this is an example. Some of you maybe have seen these before. How many of you have ever looked at a property deed and seen a covenant before? Okay, so some of you might recognize this. This is an example of covenant. You can't read this. I'll have some other ones. Please don't strain your eyes. This is from the Beverly Hills subdivision in Wauwatosa. And so this is what we're really focusing on in this project, obviously. Racial covenants were often framed in terms of preserving preserving the character of a neighborhood, protecting property values. Sometimes they were referred to as private zoning. And these came into fruition in the early part of the 20th century and withstood court challenges throughout the teens, the 20s, and the 30s, even into the early 40s. So these were legally challenged, but they were in place, they were legally used mechanisms to exclude people of color from certain areas of the city. And so we know that covenants were used throughout the United States in every US city in order to segregate cities. They were explicitly designed to prevent, as I keep saying, non-white people from owning, occupying, or even being present on properties, except in certain roles, as we'll talk about in just a moment. But until very recently, few comprehensive studies existed that thoroughly documented the full number of racial covenants that exist, the amount of land that they covered. And this is just because of the sheer volume of data we're talking about, because it's difficult to access these deeds. And you'll get in a sense about the volume that we're talking about in just a minute. So we are part of a group of researchers, activists, community groups across the nation that now are using new techniques to be able to find and to document and to map covenants. We can't do this without you. And we'll talk more about this process in just a minute, but this is why your work in this is so essential. So even though we know the covenants exist in Milwaukee County, we've been studying these, we've been digging into them for years leading up to this moment. We don't know how many exist, and we don't know how much land in Milwaukee County was actually covered with racial covenants. We don't know what their spatial patterning is. We don't know the temporality where we might see clusters. We have hypotheses, we have examples, but what we're doing with this project is finally thoroughly documenting this so that we can create a resource, a data set, maps that are of use to anybody in the county who's interested in and beyond, activist groups, municipal leaders. And so this is kind of the goal of the project. I wanted to put, let's see here, I've got a couple. I've gone ahead and transcribed a few of these so you can read them. They're difficult to see in that form I just showed to you. And these are examples. I picked some from the general area where we are today. We see examples here from Whitefish Bay, from Shorewood. And I pull this up to once again kind of illustrate the deeply harmful, offensive, and racist language that we're engaging with when we transcribe these covenants that you may encounter. And I also pull this up here to indicate what you see. I've included here when these particular covenants were filed with the county and when they were set to expire. And this varies significantly. We see these ones are all fairly close. These are all in about a 25-year period. 25 years was often the baseline that was assumed to establish the quote unquote racial character of a neighborhood. So some of these that we find were set to last in without an expiration date. And so as we can, here's an example that we see from a development called Strathmore. It was filed in 1927, yep, and it was set to expire in 1975. So this is an extent. This is an interesting map. I've highlighted, I know you can't see this, but in yellow behind me, this is the actual development in question here. And it's an interesting map for urbanists, for people that are interested in the city, but it's mapping a lot of the early suburban developments that were taking place. It's from 1926. We can draw conclusions that it's highly likely that each of the subdivisions that are on here, I know this is light coloring, likely contain racial covenants. And that's part of what you'll be doing with us, is documenting where these are so that we can understand them. A lot of the questions that we get when we do these presentations is, are these still legal? And if they're not legal, why are we still thinking about them? Why do we want to study them now? And in fact, there is a long history of legal challenges and activism surrounding covenants. The NAACP in the early part of the 20th century, addressing racial covenants was one of their core programs, both at the federal level and in local chapters. The NAACP was the organization that was bringing legal challenges to various court systems throughout the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. They are the organization that successfully litigated the case that finally made covenants unenforceable. This case is called Shelley versus Kramer. It was in 1948. Now, interestingly, that 1948 court case made covenants unenforceable. It did not make covenants illegal. And so, indeed, we continue to see that racial covenants continue to be filed well after that 1948 decision. So this meant that people could continue to insert the covenants into their property deeds, but the state and the local courts would no longer enforce them. Yet they continued to be included. We know, for example, that in the Crestview Acres subdivision in Greendale, racial covenant was filed in 1958, full decade after Shelley versus Kramer. We've recently discovered a covenant in Fox Point that was filed in 1962. So what we know is that even when these weren't legally enforceable, their symbolic power remained. Whites only is what these were designed to communicate. It wasn't until the 1968 Fair Housing Act that covenants were finally made illegal. And yet, as we know, these covenants live on in these records, and they represent a really tangible way for us to look at the ways in which structural racism was embedded within institutions and neighborhoods in ways that maybe we didn't know prior to engaging with the covenants. So no, they are not legal anymore, but they created a legacy that we live with today. And so part of the goal here is to understand and better untangle that legacy. All right, so how are we doing this? What is the nature of the project? And I won't spend much time here, but it's useful, I think, if we can contextualize how you all fit into this longer process that's been going on. So just briefly, I want to note that while we've been undertaking this work with the digitized property records that I'm going to explain in just a moment, Derek and our colleagues, we've also been doing a deep archival dig into Black activism around housing covenants and housing discrimination in Milwaukee County in the early part of the 20th century. We in Milwaukee area know a lot about the open housing marches in the late 1960s, those iconic marches. But that didn't just spring up out of nowhere. There was activism throughout the early part of the 20th century that helped lay the groundwork for those movements. And so what our goal is to do is to better document the kind of activism that was taking place in the early part of the 20th century around housing and racism in housing in Milwaukee. So that's an aspect of the project we're not delving into today, but we'll love to talk to you about it more. Let's talk about how we're doing this work where you come in. So the first thing that we had to do, as I mentioned, this has been a long process. We've been doing this for a while. The first thing that we had to overcome is we had to get digitized access to property records. And when I started this work, property records were not digitized. And it was a slow moving process. I share this anecdote. My apologies if you've heard it before, but this gives you a sense. When I first started this work and I was doing it by hand, I was thrilled to be able to document 50 new covenants in a matter of a semester with the help of a research assistant. Now that's nothing too shabby, that's 50. But what we're looking at right now, we have a data set of 20,000 potential racial covenants. So I would have been doing that work. I would have to do it beyond the grave, quite frankly, to ever even get close to doing this project. So this is where our collaborators, the Mapping Prejudice project in Minneapolis comes in. We found that they were doing the same work that we were interested in doing, but they had adopted this very innovative methodology that we wanted to take on here. And so that's what I'm describing here. And this is where we're collaborating with them a lot. So it did take a while. We did acquire the digitized property records. That was a years-long process, but we got them. We have all of the property records that were filed or that exist in Milwaukee County between 1910 and 1960. This equates to roughly 1.7 million images. This is the volume of data we're talking about. So these are images. So that's what happens in this kind of first category. So once we have this, we use these images. We use the optical character recognition to convert those images to text. This is where it gets kind of technical. Then we use what's called Python scripts, or what we might just say a computer software, to identify racial language in that text. So my colleagues at Mapping Prejudice call it the deed machine. They have a sophisticated computing system that allows them to run scripts to detect the kind of language that we might see. So for example, the word Caucasian, the word that we're going to find a lot. We flag the word citizen because we found non-citizens being excluded from property here in Milwaukee, in a covenant in South Milwaukee. We have the kind of terminology that you've seen on previous slides then to flag this information. So from this, then we culled a data set from the initial huge 1.7 million images. We're now down to a 21,000 data set of potential covenants. And it's important to note here that these are potential covenants. There are a whole host of things that have been pulled in with this data search that may not be covenants. So you may, in fact, encounter documents that don't contain a covenant. There are some wills in there. You're going to find some court cases in there. I, as a history nerd and a documents nerd, find them very fascinating to read. But some of those are not, they're up there. They don't contain covenants, and you'll start to see that right away. We also have an additional set that we're not using of about 200,000 handwritten deeds that also exist. So that's coming soon. But right now we're just sticking with the type deeds, and you'll see how this comes into play. So we flagged then the potential covenants, or the deeds with covenants in them, racial covenants. And here's where you all come in. We need to have 5 sets of eyes on every document. And the reason that we need to do that is for verification. Computers are brilliant. We're hearing a lot of AI, but a lot about AI and the future of AI, and certainly it's powerful. But what we also know is that computers have troubles contextualizing language. So for example, documents might be pulled that have terms like brown or white or black in the context of various things, even paint color, we've seen it come up, that have nothing to do with race. But that's why we need human eyes to look at a document. Is this really a covenant? In this instance where white appears, is it being pulled up because it's reflecting Whitefish Bay? Or is it being pulled up because it says whites only? And so this is where the volunteer effort comes in. Now, a lot of times people have said to us, well, with the advances in AI, why don't you just use AI to do this work? We certainly could if we wanted to. But what we've discovered is what's the most important part of this project is doing this together in community with all of you, with the volunteers, because we often say the proof is in the process. In sharing information about these covenants with all of you, this is a way for us all to face our past, to recognize our past, and to know more about our community and the places that surround us, and how it is that the racial geography of Milwaukee County came to be the way it is today. And so as we work through this process, we will then be developing maps. The ultimate product will be a map where anybody wants to look up a property and see if there's a racial covenant, they can do it. They can look at their cousin's property, their own property, their grandmother's property. You'll be able to do that. We'll also map important sites for resistance as well. So this is kind of an overview of where you all come in, where we are now. I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A, but I know that you're here because you want to do this yourself. And so let's now move into the process of doing this. What do we need to do to get started here? Okay, and so this is where I passed out we've got handouts at the table. If you need any, let us know. This is essentially what that handout says, that we have all of these steps right here. In order to show you the various websites, I'm going to have to leave this PowerPoint screen. And so that's why I wanted to make sure you had that on paper if you need to. There's a couple over here. So the first and most important thing, and maybe some of you have already done this, maybe you haven't, is for you to create a free Xenoverse account. So Xenoverse, if you type that into your search bar, you can do that right now if you don't have a Xenoverse account. This is the crowdsourcing platform that we will be using to look at and view the covenant or the property records, be looking for the covenants. So do we need a minute to set up our Xenoverse accounts? You want to take about a minute to pull that up if you've got it. I'm going to escape out of here and see if I can pull up the web page. Everybody online and attending virtually, if you haven't already, sign into your Xenoverse account. Okay, for everybody, this is what my Xenoverse page looks like. Here I'm on, I'll just go to Xenoverse home first, so because this isn't what you're going to see just yet. So if I go to xenoverse.org, let's see here. Now, the important thing is that the project, you have to get into the web page the right way. So the first thing we want to do, this is our crowdsourcing platform. This is Xenoverse for us. I'm already signed in. You can see this is a kind of a cool feature. You can track how many classifications you've made. I've been in a lull. I need to get back to it, but I've done about 432 at this point. I got to get busy. I got more to do here. We got 20,000 of these. And so you'll have your Xenoverse account. Any questions about Xenoverse, or can I move on to the next step beyond Xenoverse? Because we're going to leave the Xenoverse page for a minute. It's Xenoverse.org. And you can create an account. It's in the top right corner. I see a lot of you have Xenoverse up, so you're ready to go. You are either an exceptionally well-prepared audience, which I'm guessing that might be the case. You're already logged in, or are people not logging in today? You're going to come back after the fact. Okay. All right. Well, then I will move on to the next. We have a question?
No, I got it.
Okay, all right, so assuming we have Xenoverse accounts, this is a free account. It was created by physicists at the University of Minnesota for crowdsourcing research like this, so to bring people into the research process. From there, we're going to go to the Mapping Prejudice page. I'm going to go to their homepage. I'm going to show you how to get right where we need to be. The Mapping Prejudice is, as I've mentioned, there are collaborators. It's mappingprejudice.umn.org. You can even just type Mapping Prejudice into your search bar, and they will come up.
Actually,
Okay, sorry.
Change it.
.edu there. Sorry, Derek caught me. So mappingprejudice.umn.edu. You can just type Mapping Prejudice into your search bar and they will come up. So this is the group. This is the group that we're collaborating with this transcription process. If you choose to do some of our virtual transcriptions, you might be doing it virtually through here. I'm going to take you through the steps now so we can do this. Okay, we're going to go to this icon here, or this link. It says Take Action. Once we click on Take Action, there's a link here that says Volunteer. That's what we're doing today. So we've clicked over to Volunteer. This is an example of the map of covenants in Minneapolis. You can play around on their webpage if you're curious. We're going to scroll down to this part right here. This is where if you're looking to sign up for one of our weekly transcription sessions, if you'd like to attend on the 25th or the 1st, you can sign up here. But the important point for us is this is the link that you need. Can everybody see this? This is the Mapping Prejudice Xenoverse page. Now, I know this is a lot, but let me just tell you, this is the only way that you can get into our section on Xenoverse to actually transcribe these. There's a reason for this. It isn't just an open public where anybody can get on and do things. Unfortunately, we've had issues where people have Zoom bombed meetings. We've had issues where meetings have been purposely derailed. So we can only get to where we need to be by going through the Mapping Prejudice page to their Mapping Prejudice Xenoverse page. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and show you what it looks like. Now this is here we are in Xenoverse. Now it's not the general Xenoverse page. You see this? It's not just the welcome to Xenoverse, hi, and different things. This is specifically Mapping Prejudice right here. Can people over here see? I realize I'm blocking you both ways here. Looks a little different. I know the lighting's kind of hard to see. Now what you'll see is there's a bar here at the top of the page. And the critically important bar for us, or button to push here, is classified. That is the work that we're doing, is classifying. So here we go. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Okay, let's walk through this one together before we do it on our own. I want to point out a couple of things for you. As we get started on this, every page that you go through, you will see that you're prompted through a series of questions. Our first question is pretty darn easy. Is this a handwritten document or is it mostly typed and legible? What do we think? Okay, you're going to see some of those handwritten ones. Let's just say it is a handwritten one. If I were to click here, it would toss that one out into another folder. Not to say we're not looking at those, but right now our focus is not on the handwritten ones. So we're going to click mostly typed. Now the button I also wanted you to see is, you see this needs some help with the task? This is your friend. It is always here to help you. If you have a question, if you're not sure about something, you can click here. I mean, here we even get an example of what a handwritten deed would look like. So you can verify for certain that you're not looking at a handwritten deed. So I just want to point us to that. We can go through it. Okay, so here we are. We're going to say it's mostly typed. Now let me move my screen over so that we can actually we can see what we're doing. So when you look at a property deed, this is a pretty standard format right here. Interestingly, different states use different kind of formatting, and sometimes you'll see slightly different language. You will generally see the date at the top. You'll see reference to parties in the first, parties in the second. Parties in the first are the seller, parties in the second are the buyer. But now we see here that this is the document we're looking at. So this is what we would scan through to see, are there any covenants here? Now, I can already tell that this probably doesn't have covenants. I'm not going to give it away yet, but I can see the word that's been flagged here. Do you see this? Louis Mendel and Ruth Mandel, and his wife, both American citizens. I'm going to venture a guess that this has been flagged because of the term citizen right here, but let's wait and see. We're going to scan down here. I know this is very hard to read. Please don't strain your eyes. Those of you who can see it comfortably, what we would see, I'm not seeing anything. I see a description of the property right here. So we can see it's lot number 5, block number 2 in Highland Heights. The description of the property. We scroll down here. We see more details here. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can see with me. Yeah. You're okay. All right. So we see that there are recorded restrictions down here. It said, but they're not here. So this indicates what page we're on. See this little dot right here? I'm showing you all the functions so you can really get the inside knowledge. This is what page we're on. This is the next page. That's it. That's all this is. So does this contain a covenant? We can say no. But if we want to make sure, this is a very handy tip. This is one I turn to a lot. See this little eye right here? Takes you to the back work of the machine and tells you why the deed machine, if we want to call it this, or our computing software, has flagged this. See the number matched terms. we see citizen. So we know that where we saw citizens, that is in fact why this was flagged. We've looked at it carefully. This one's kind of a dud for our first one. Doesn't look like it has anything, but critically important to sift these through. So I'm going to hit the, oops, not handwritten, mostly typed. I'll hit next. It's surprisingly hard to do this and talk at the same time. So we just went through this process. Again, I'm going to show you this. Here's the question, the prompt. For those who can't see it in the back, it says, does this image or reference contain, or does this contain a reference a racial covenant? Nope, not all deeds will have this. And so this is where we can hit yes or no. And here you can also hit, I can't figure this out. There are volunteers who are so involved in this that are intrepid volunteers that will also respond to questions if you're not sure. There's a button down here on the bottom. I'm blocking it, so you probably can't see it, but it says done and talk. If you're worried that you haven't caught something or you've missed something, don't be worried. This is where the 5 other people that are going to look at this, or the 4 other people in addition to you, come in. This is why we have this verification. We have multiple people looking to make sure the data that we get is right. So we know this isn't one. So we're going to go ahead and hit no, or stay done. Now, immediately what happens? A whole new document pops up in our Xenoverse platform. So we have our next example. Now let me just, I think we can agree this is typed. We don't need to belabor that point. And now we're seeing a little bit more language here. I apologize for everybody in the back that this is hard to see, but you'll be able to look at these on your own. What we can see here, sorry, I'm having problems. There we go. Here we get into some of the restrictions. And I want to see, can anybody see a racial covenant? In the back, Kari? Oh, yeah. Here we are. It's hard to read, but you would want to read each of these. I know, my apologies for your eyes over here. It's hard to read even up close, but I could see right here, no lot or lots shall be occupied by or conveyed to a colored person. And again, there's that horribly racist language. So what we're going to do is come on over here. We're going to hit mostly typed. We're going to hit next. Yes, there's a racial covenant. And luckily this is a shorter one because it's easier for me to type in front of other people right now. Some of them are very long. Here's a point. I'm going to hit the pause button here and say this. If you're doing this work, type it exactly as it looks in the document. We are academics and we're looking for accuracy here, even if there's a typo. We've had it happen before where people have edited the language because it is so offensive. We understand and we're sympathetic with that, but we want the language. We want it exactly as it's written and its historical accuracy. Yes.
Some of these, it's an entire paragraph, it's one sentence. You want that entire paragraph type?
What you can do is you can state just what, so this is a good question for those of you not heard it, what, and for those of you virtual, if it's a whole paragraph and there's some really challenged writing you're going to see, very, very long run-on sentences. And so the question is, where do you end? Where do you begin? Keep it in the part that is just the covenant. But if it includes lots of language, so what we see in some of these, they say this extends to grantors and successors of the heir. It goes on and on and on. If it's still referencing the covenant, please include all of the details that pertain to the covenant. So in this case, it says, please transcribe entirely, or the entirety, excuse me, of the racially restrictive covenant. So this one is easier for us because it's a shorter. I'm just going to type real quick. A lot. This is where it's, and then it's capitalized. So I'm going to follow my own directions here. Never have problems typing until you're doing it in front of a group of people. This is okay, so this, we've got it in here. Do you see any typos? It's good. It's great to tell me if I got any typos in here. Nope, we're good. Okay, that's it. We've done it. That was a short one. Now here is where we're going to be reading a little bit more closely. We are mapping this information. So we need certain kinds of geospatial data in order to be able to map these. So this is where you have to enter in the kind of geographic data that you see in the property record. Now, you might see a long lengthy description, 1/3 acre of the lot by such and such street. It doesn't actually say it. That's okay. You can see, you have an option to say only a lengthy property description. You might find a cemetery plot. I have found a cemetery plot. There is a cemetery plot in it's in Greenfield. I can't think of the name right now. You might find these different, you'll become more comfortable with these things, but let's just start and go back to our document and see what we've got here. Oh, okay, so the standard format that you'll frequently see, remember that this, we're missing, they've thrown us for a loop here. We're missing some pages here. We don't have a lot of descriptions in the typical place. So I'm just going to take a look at this and see if I can find information about the lot. We are missing a page here. So in this case, we are going to say something else or no geographic information because we don't have it. So again, you can always need some help if you're not sure. What you're typically going to find is the lot number and the block number. Those are the critical details that you need. If there are multiple lots, you can enter the numbers with a comma in between them. Lot 1, lot 2, lot 3. And you'll see, I'm just going to pretend that we have this. Let's look at this. So here's our options, one or more lot in a single block. If that were the case, let's just pretend that's the case. Come on. Work with us, internet. If that were the case, we'd enter here. If we needed to enter, looks like I'm having slow internet right here. Essentially, you would look at this document and see what you can find. I'm gonna, now here we're in another issue. Normally, we would see the buyers and the sellers. And we enter that information that won't be on the website just to have for our records. Here we are at the lot and the track number. They finally went through. So this is what you would see if you were entering the lot and the block number. I'm going to go back because we don't have that information. We're going to go back to this, something else or no geographic information. Now this is where it would say, who's the seller? We could probably say that Home Builders Finance Mortgage is here, but it's not very clear who's the buyer in this one. We're not seeing, so this is a tricky one. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to skip on so that we can see an example that maybe we'll just say, let's see, done in time. It may not let me do here. Let's.
Before you go on,
Yeah, sure. Please ask.
you want the 6th paragraph typed up because it talks about running with the land.
That part you don't have to do. We'll be going back on the back end and checking these things. The important date that you would get if you were prompted. The deed machine isn't giving me the good ones here to help you with more clearly defined things, but we do include the date on the document because that's part of how we're tracking the temporality or like when all of these were established. We're not listing at this point in time expiration date. That will be on the maps, however. So we're not asking you to find the expiration date. Thank you for that question. Other questions? Well, I'm going to toss this one out by saying it's handwritten, even though it's not. Okay, yes.
Would there only be one reference through racial bias, or would you never look?
Sometimes you can find a multiple reference. So for example, sometimes there'll be a racial covenant on a specific property in a subdivision that also has racially restrictive covenants. So for example, one of the images that I showed earlier in the presentation was from Grand Tosa Heights. That's an example of a petition-wide covenant, which covers the entire, excuse me, not a petition-wide, a residential covenant that covers the entire development. Okay, I think we have a more promising example here. This is what one with a covenant would typically look like. The reason I note this is that we see the sale and the date here. So we see that this is a document that's from the 15th day of October. It's from 1935. We can see that this is an agreement between Atlas Land Company, and that is going to be our party in the first here. And then we can see the buyer as listed right here. So we have the information we need. Oh, and look at this. We have the geographic information we need. Again, my apologies to those of you in the back of the room. When you're on this page and you're looking yourself, you'll be able to zoom in and do all these things. We can see here that we have a clear description of the block, the number. It's in Norwood. We also have a town, so that we know where this is. We see Wauwatosa here. So here we are. Here's the section where it's likely we're going to find a covenant. If you're able to read here, take a glance. If you can't, hold on. I'm going to scan really quickly and see what I find. Yep. Here it is, right in front. Sometimes that we see covenants, the racial covenants placed in different areas of the document. Sometimes they'll be listed towards the end of the covenants that are explained. Sometimes they'll be early in the beginning, but here we can read it. That is mutually agreed and understood by and between the parties hereto, that this deed is executed and delivered upon the express conditions that said land shall never be occupied by or conveyed to a colored person. Okay, so again, my apologies for the offensive language. Here's an example where we could probably leave off that stuff at the beginning. And we'll start right here. Let's see, that said land is where we're going to start. So we know it's typed. We're going to go through here. Yes, there's a covenant. We're going to go on this, okay? All right, we've got it. And again, it was a short one. Okay, this is where I wanted to have an example of the geographic information because this is a critical part of the project. Okay, so let's scroll back up. Often we find the geographic information after the sellers and the buyers are listed here at the top of the document. So here we have lot number 14. So we have one lot. That's the critical information. So now we know it's one or more lots in a single block. Oh, yep. Okay, so one or more lots. We're going to click on that. We're going to hit next. So it said, here I am with the prompt. Again, more information. And I just want to point back, need help with this task at every step of the way. You can click on this. And if you're done, you can toss it out. Someone else will pick it up. This shouldn't be an exercise that causes extreme frustration. If you're confused about a document, hit talk, someone can respond to you and you can just move on. Okay, so here we are. We already know, I've already forgotten here. We're looking at lot 14. So here we are. This is the lot number 14. And we're looking at the block number, which is 13. And then you'll see the last question here is there an addition or a plat name? Here's where we're talking about if there's a specific subdivision or neighborhood, a plat that's listed. Here we know that the subdivision is Norwood. So all of these then are clues for us and that we are able to use to produce maps. It's probably not surprising to know that boundaries have changed since the 20s. And so there's a lot of synthesizing between the kind of contemporary land and delineations and the past ones. So that's what we have to do, kind of what we have to work with dealing with the mapping component. Okay, now it's asking us who's the seller, and we can see that that is Atlas. Sorry, I can't type. I'm talking Atlas. Okay, and let's see. Atlas Land Co. We see a lot of Atlas Land Co. actually in here. We'll go ahead and type the full name. And then we can see the sellers here. Again, we're just listing it as it appears in the document. So we see Arnold H. And sometimes it's tricky to read these documents. And then all right, so we've got this, and then we'll get our last question. What is the day? This one's easy. It's the 13th of October. Just verifying that's 36. So we're going to hit 13. And I know it's kind of a little boring to watch this, so thanks for bearing with me. But this is how this work is done. All right, so now we hit done. You've just seen your first example. We as a group have just classified a deed and we've identified a racial covenant. Question.
All right, can you go back to the part after it lists the subdivision?
Yeah.
I noticed on that one it said like a subdivision in the northeast quarter of section, do you want all that?
You don't have, thank you for clarifying, just the name of the subdivision, all that extra geographic detail, we may in fact go back to it when we're making maps and we'll look back to it, but you don't need to flag it here. Thank you for checking in. Yes, another question.
Yeah, where did you get the date? You entered a date.
Okay, the date was at the very top of the page. This one, here we can see, this is another example of something you might encounter. It's at the top. You know, parties have brought forth their hand seals on the 6th day of November of 1939. I can tell this is not a covenant, so I'm gonna just hit, it's handwritten, so we toss it. They'll forgive me on the other end of the machine when I explain why I've misclassified these. Here's another one. I wanted to pull this up so you can see other geographic data so that you can answer these questions. Here we see lot number 1 and block number 5 in West Lawn Park. So we just stopped at the West Lawn Park. None of this other geographic data about the southwest quarter of the section number 15. That's we can leave out. Let's just glance at this. So again, we get one more example and some practice. Do we see a covenant here? Racial covenant? Yes, you do. Okay, so let's see. At the very, very first one, we're getting a set of very uniform covenants today. Racial covenants, because we have another example. No lot or lots shall be occupied by or conveyed to, again, the offensive language, a colored person. So in fact, this isn't, we often see that this is to anybody who is not of the white race or not of the Caucasian race, because that really captured everybody. Here we're seeing specifically targeting African-American populations. So it's a very short sentence. I'm not going to go through the whole process again, but I want to open it up and say, what do you think? What are your questions? And how can we help you? Okay, I got one here and then one here. Yep.
So the one that we have is from Minnesota. Will that also happen? What do we do?
Okay, Derek or can you check and see? You may be in the tutorial. So the ones that you should be in, you should always be in Milwaukee. And if you're not in Milwaukee, you're probably in a tutorial. So we
get to the water.
Okay, when you hit classify, that should take you directly to Milwaukee. I'll come and look at your page to see. So if you end up on a page that is listing covenants from Minneapolis, that's just a tutorial. That's an example for you. You want to make sure it's somewhere in Milwaukee County. Other questions? Oh, yes. One behind you and then you. Yep.
One is when you first come into a new indenture, sometimes it'll be on the second page.
Yes.
You gotta look at the circles at the bottom to see where you're at.
Yep.
Sometimes you think, oh, there's nothing here. It's actually on the page before that.
Okay, just quickly, I'm going to reiterate the point that was just made because it's an important one. Usually, when you open up a document, the page that you land on is the page where you're going to find racial data. That's what our computer system has done. I've got one here that doesn't have multiple pages, but those black dots on the bottom, you may have to look on various pages to find the information that you need. This one is not giving us the multiple pages. Let me show the example of that. Sorry about that. I keep getting the ones that don't have what we need here. Okay, here's an example. Nope. You would see 3 dots. I could go through this and keep finding them that don't have it, but the 3 dots at the bottom, that's going to indicate there's multiple pages. And also don't forget about this little I button right here that can tell you the information. So you can verify if you've read through this document, you're not finding the covenant, you're thinking, why the heck is this in here? You can click on the button. In this case, we're seeing a match term for citizen. Many of the ones with citizen in it don't actually have covenants. Notice I say many, but not all. As I indicated, we have found at least one that includes citizen in it. So that's why that word is in there. Okay, another question was right here. Yes.
I just know from doing family research that the city of Milwaukee changed their addresses in the
Yes.
1934. When I
That was the second time, actually. Yeah.
So, but that won't affect our research. or anything.
That's what we have to deal with. So those are the fun things that we get to deal with is the renaming of streets, the rebordering. Some areas that are listed as Milwaukee in here have actually become incorporated into Wauwatosa. Some areas that were part of Wauwatosa are now part of Milwaukee. So you don't have to worry about those details. Those are the fun challenges we get to negotiate. Questions back here? Yes.
Hopefully last question. About the seller and buyer names, often uppercase. Do we need to preserve uppercase?
Yeah, if you can just do it exactly as it is in the text is what we offer, even if it's a typo. And if it's a typo, people like, you might be tempted to put in the word sick in parentheses to indicate that there's a typo. Don't do that, just exactly as it's on there. We're replicating the typos and all. Yes.
The examples have been raised, who wants, if it's religious,
Yes, if there's religious, we certainly have religious. Jewish is a word that we have, for example, to flag. And yes, absolutely. Anything that's targeting people on the basis of their race, their ethnicity, their religious identity, those would be the kinds of terms that we're searching for. Absolutely. Yes.
So what do you want us to do if it's not a deed? You want us to do what you did and just call it handwritten?
No. I do some special stuff because I'm on that day, but what I'd like you to do, say is it handwritten and it's typed. This one is an example. It's mostly typed. We hit
Okay.
next, and then what you would do is you would say, nope, no covenant. You'd hit done.
Okay.
And this would immediately be populated with a new document for you to look at.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, yeah.
Is documents kind of random? In other words, will you see things similar to geography as you're going through it, or could it just be anywhere, suburb to city to?
We are seeing, I mean, I will say that, Wauwatosa is often an area that's associated with racial covenants. There's no doubt that, many covenants are found in Wauwatosa. So you certainly see certain places. There are many in Whitefish Bay. There are many in Shore. So you'll start to see a pattern. We can also note that there is a historical trajectory here and when some of these areas developed. So you'll see earlier covenants associated with what we call inner ring suburbs. You'll see covenants in outer ring suburbs later. But one thing, even as a researcher who studies these, I've been surprised at the ones that we found earlier than I thought in some divisions that I expected would be later. So that what you asked is exactly what we want to find out. Is there a particular pattern? Are there a bunch being filed in the 1920s in this particular village or town? What's going on
Or
here?
the city of Milwaukee? I don't know.
There's definitely examples in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is not free of covenants. There's lots of covenants in Milwaukee. So this includes all municipalities and villages in Milwaukee County. Anybody have any thoughts? I'll answer your question and then I want to conclude with one last thing and then we can mill about and talk a little bit more. Question here.
obviously you want us to look at this early, but you recommend that we cheat or that we not cheat?
That you cheat. Well, I know what the Professor Bonds might say, which is don't cheat, but I can say that I cheat myself, and once you get good at this, it may not look like it right now, but once you get into this and you start to know how to navigate these systems, you can sit down and if you have, this is what I kind of like to do. I've got 15 minutes between a meeting and not a lot of time to do a lot of work, but I could sit down and look at least 3 of these and capture them. And so, yeah, you get good at it. You could jump right here and you could say, okay, what's the word? Here's our friend citizen. And then you can see, oh, look, there's not multiple pages. And you could just do a scan here. And you can see that I already know these documents enough that I can start to recognize what I'm seeing here. So still do a read through to make sure, but you can cheat and see what the word is that you're looking for. Sometimes you'll find examples that have 2 words. It might have the word Caucasian and white, or it might have the word Caucasian and colored. I'm sorry to use that terminology. When you see the doubling up of language, there's a covenant in there. That points to a high degree of certainty that there's a covenant in there. So if you want to make it easy on yourself, go ahead and go straight down to that. There's a reason I pointed that out. I find it to be a very handy button. One other thing I'll just show you, this button, just since we're talking about the functionality of the program, this little button right here, it looks like kind of a little plus sign. This is called a pan button. And this is useful, let's say when you have a covenant, the covenant's way down at the bottom of the page, but you got to enter it into this text box up here. So with the pan button, you can move the document around, you can move it to the exact placement, You can zoom in. That way you can see the document. You can have the language of the covenant right where you need it to be while you're transcribing. Now, one thing I want to note is that there's a lot of moving parts here. We're dealing with different softwares. We're looking at documents where we can't predict exactly what you're going to see. So as you begin doing this, you might, again, you've taken notes. I've seen you all be very focused, but you might not know what to do. You can always turn to, I can't figure this out. Let me get my escape button here. You might have someone and this will pull up. You can stop. We will also continue to have our every Wednesday virtual transcription sessions. You would get to those through the Mapping Prejudice page, where you would go see here, we attend one of our weekly transcription sessions. Right now, I'm going to click on that. We've just got February 1st. We've got January 21st and February 1st up. We'll be populating this with more. These things, these events right here are presentations that they're doing on the work in Minneapolis and in the state of Minnesota. The volunteers from Minnesota are working with us, so you may be interested in what they're finding in Minnesota. You can attend those, but if you're looking for Milwaukee specific things, all of these sessions right here, volunteer for mapping, but these will all be focused on Milwaukee. So we have sessions on Wednesdays. We alternate either Wednesday at lunchtime from 12 to 1 or Wednesdays in the evening from 7 to 8. So you might want to attend another session just as a refresher course. I was speaking with Anne earlier who introduced this. She said she's attended a couple of them and it really helped her solidify her skills. And I want to note one other thing as we're kind of winding down. Derek mentioned this as well. You may only do 1 or 2 of these. You know, that may be your capacity or your interest level, and that's fine. We're looking for volunteers who can take on what they can. You might be like me and be really just interested. I mean, it does become kind of almost like a gamified experience. Like, what am I going to see next? And when you find these shocking things, it's like, what's going to be next? And you might find that you really get bitten by the bug and you want to do multiple of these. We welcome all levels of volunteering, however you want to be involved or participate. Yes.
When do you expect to have this done, or what's your timeline?
That's a great question, and that depends on on all of us, how fast we're transcribing. I will note that in March, we will be holding an event. We'll be certain to notify folks about this. We'll be sharing through all of our networks how you learn about this event, where our colleagues from Minnesota will be coming. They'll be visiting, and we will be presenting some preliminary maps. Right now, we have 5% of this volume of documents that we need to get through. So, you know, I will say this, we're in for a months-long process. We can't predict how long because it depends on how fast this part of it goes, but we're going to be releasing maps as we go. So we're not going to leave you hanging until we're done. We're going to keep updating the maps and updating the information, and we'll hope so. Hopefully within the next year we'll be done. May take us a little longer, may take us less, but we'll keep you updated. Yes.
I was just going to say there was a wonderful program on PBS just last week, I think, Jim Crow of the North. It was really explained this so well.
It's wonderful. You can find the link to it on the Mapping Prejudice page. That the Jim Crow of the North, the documentary on PBS, documents the process of this with our colleagues in Minneapolis who've been doing this work and really kind of, you know, explains what this looked like in Minneapolis. So there's lots of resources on this page. My final question, and if you don't feel like sharing, that's fine, but if any of you do, what is your reaction to seeing these documents in this language? Is there anything you want to share with the group as we're digging into this and we're beginning to think more deeply about racial covenants in our own communities? Yeah.
I find that I'm quite ignorant.
Yeah.
About it, and like, really? In this day and age is what I think.
You're not alone. Yeah, a lot of people are familiar with redlining. We've heard a lot about redlining in recent years, as playing a role in segregation. But many fewer people have heard of covenants. So covenants are, don't feel ignorant, but this will open your eyes, and thank you for sharing. It's hard to believe that these existed and they weren't widely known. And I think that's a really important point to dwell on. Yes.
I'm just wondering, my roommate was in Milwaukee in the 1970s. She lived like the Roosevelt Drive by Capitol Drive area, and her block and her parents had signs up, this house is not for sale. This is the 70s, and I'm just wondering if there's a connection to covenants, like the whole block would have signs that this house is not for sale.
That's probably to prevent blockbusting, another technique that's been used. Blockbusting is when real estate agents would prey on white homeowners, say, hey, if Black people are moving to your neighborhood, you better sell now. It was an unscrupulous practice. Then they would turn around and sell those very same properties to people of color at highly inflated prices. This absolutely happened in Milwaukee. It's well documented in the Sherman Park neighborhood. So yeah, that would be a reflection of blockbusting.
And that was in 1870.
Yep, that's when blockbusting was underway. Yep. Question over here.
Is there, I know this is getting ahead of things, but are you gonna do other counties?
There's lots of interest in other counties. Yes, Derek and I like to say one place at a time, so we can't say, but we know that there are folks at work in Dane County that have interest in this. There's definitely interest throughout the state. And so my response to that would be, yes, I'm sure that the other places are going to be done. I'm not sure when. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any plans to share this information, which is so crucial to the wider community?
Yes, absolutely. We'll be, giving lots of community workshops as we're in the transcription process. We'll be taking the show on the road, so to speak. And the ultimate production from this is not an academic article or a book, although we may do those, but the ultimate production, the goal of this is a community resource. This is a community project. It's a collaborative project. We're producing this for the community to use. So yes, we'll be sharing this throughout the county. You'll hear a lot from us.
I also want to answer that as well. As I mentioned before, we're interested in collecting stories. We're seeing it in black and white, but many families have stories. I didn't grow up in Milwaukee. I'm from Pittsburgh originally. Pittsburgh is just like Milwaukee in a lot of ways, but I'm quite sure there are many families here in Milwaukee can tell of stories or have family stories where they try to purchase a house and were turned away or told that it's already been rented out. So that's something that we're interested in too. It's not just the empirical data, but the stories in which this data can help us to tell. Yes. You, yes.
Engaging with Black and Brown communities on their work. I know that when we talk about this, we focus more on predominantly white communities, but as you mentioned, that this is probably something that is in existence on G's and Black and Brown communities.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, we hope to hold workshops wherever. But we do recognize that some people might find this disturbing. Some people might find it traumatic. Some people, it might bring back some very bad memories. So, but we're gonna host this wherever, whoever invites us, local churches, community groups. So, I think that's the answer to that question.
In a typical set of documents, is there a typical percentage that have covenant? As we go through these, I'm only finding 20%. Is that a sign that I'm way off or?
No, that's a great question. I can't answer. We don't have, that's kind of what we're doing is sifting through there. So you saw probably what you just saw with me is a good example. I was kind of pushing through some towards the end that weren't covenants, but one pulls up and it doesn't have a covenant. The next one does, but it's missing some data. Next one does, next one does. So I guarantee if you sit there for a few minutes, you'll find one. But you may go through a couple of other strange documents, wills, as I mentioned, or court records, that those got tossed in there. So you see some of those, or simply properties without covenants, racial covenants. So sorry, that's kind of a non-answer. So I don't have a percentage here, but there's definitely, I've done enough of these in different settings that you'll definitely see racial covenants for sure. Yes.
I just wanted to go back to the comment about collecting stories.
Yes.
I'm wondering how you are, if there is a plan to do that in terms of like talking to the real people who have been affected by these racial covenants.
Right, we do not have a plan just as yet. There's some processes that we have to go through, and we also want to think about how do we want to do that, so. We welcome any suggestions that you may have or any input, because again, this is a community project. You know, we all live here in Milwaukee County. Well, I'm making an assumption we all live in Milwaukee County, and this is something that we're working on together.
I just wanted to follow up with that, just to note that what we're finding is as people learn about the project, many people are volunteering their stories. And so I can tell you, since the article about the project in the Journal Sentinel came out, many people have reached out and said, my property has a racial covenant. Here's what the property looks like. We found it out. We didn't know it existed. Or we've had other people share stories. We wanted to live in a neighborhood, but we couldn't. And that's because there were covenants on the properties. So some of these are going to be stories that people are volunteering, but we will have a way in which people who want to share more can communicate with us, and ultimately to collect these stories as part of our community narrative and our community stories around housing and segregation. Yes.
I assume you have been in contact with Fair Housing Council.
Yes, absolutely.
Didn't hear it.
The question was if we've been in contact with the Fair Housing Council. Yes. One last plug. I know people have to get home to dinner. Thank you for coming. If you have questions, feel free to email us. We'll be doing this. You'll probably hear a lot from us in the coming weeks. Feel free to stay and ask questions if you've got them. Feel free to email me if you have questions too. bonsa@uwm.edu. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
I still can't sign in, even though I created an account. It just is like not letting me in.
Did you go to?